What if some of the strongest feelings we call love are not actually love at all? Because sometimes what we experience as love is something else entirely. Sometimes it is projection. Sometimes it might be dependency disguised as destiny. Or it might also be the search for the parts of ourselves we had to bury in order to survive. And until you see that clearly, you may keep misunderstanding what a connection is here to do, whether it is meant to stay in your life or awaken something inside you. If you've ever felt like the way love is portrayed in the world never quite made sense to you, I mean the performance of it, all the drama, the idea that someone is supposed to complete you, well, there might be a reason for it. What if we were never meant to be completed by another person? What if underneath everything we call love is something deeper calling us toward wholeness, a deeper evolutionary path drawing us toward becoming whole? Because real love is not here to make us feel chosen. It is here to transform us by exposing us first, where we're still fragmented and still unconscious, where we're still looking outside ourselves for something that was always meant to grow within us. And sometimes the person that we think we might be in love with is just carrying a piece of ourselves we have not yet learned to embody. But how does something like that even happen? To understand this, I think we need to look at something deeper about how we become who we are. Because none of us move through this life without adaptation. Very early on, we begin learning which parts of us are welcomed and which parts can threaten the connection. The quiet conditioning carried through family, culture, environments we grew up in. For example, softness may be encouraged, while anger can be strongly discouraged. Being helpful can be praised in your family, but being direct can cause punishment. Or sensitivity can be labeled as too much, while visibility can invite some harsh criticism. Expressing your truth freely can also cause punishment and disapproval. And slowly, something subtle begins to happen inside us. One way to see it is through a simple image of a mirror that is already carrying fine cracks from inherited patterns and wounds that existed long before we had the language for them. And as life unfolds through early experiences, conditioning, and adaptation, these cracks begin to spread, causing the mirror to fracture into a number of different fragments. And some of these fragments are much easier to show to the world, the parts of us that were accepted, rewarded, and encouraged. So we take those parts and we turn them outward, making them our personality. But other parts are dangerous to reveal, so we push them deep inside as if they never existed. But the thing is that these parts do not disappear. They remain in our unconscious, waiting, and later in life they begin to appear again in a very particular way, usually through attraction, through connections that feel magnetic, mysterious, almost destined. Because when we encounter someone who is expressing freely a quality we had to suppress, something inside us recognizes it because it feels strangely familiar, even though we rarely recognize why. We don't see yet in the moment that what we admire in another person or what we feel strongly intimidated by or resist might actually be the part of ourselves that we learn to reject. So without realizing what is happening, we begin searching for these missing fragments of ourselves in other people, hoping and believing that only if we hold on to them long enough, something inside us will finally feel whole and complete. And this is where misunderstanding happens, because what we often call love is just fragmentation looking for itself outside. And eventually, I began noticing the same pattern in my own life. Certain dynamics kept repeating in ways that I couldn't explain at first. For example, I came into this world deeply connected to certain qualities that are considered to be of the feminine aspect of the psyche, such as empathy, intuition, sensitivity, openness, and spiritual curiosity. Those always were natural to me, and they still are. But I was also something else as a child. I questioned everything and everyone. I spoke my mind freely. I challenged authority. I sensed the things that no one wanted named, and I named them anyways. So those were my default settings. And I could see how this kind of child could be perceived as inconvenient and hard to control, especially in certain cultural environments where there were specific expectations around how girls are supposed to behave. So therefore, certain parts of me had to go underground very early. Qualities like assertiveness, authority, healthy anger when something felt unjust, the desire to speak plainly about things that I was sensing and seeing and feeling. And this is what naturally happens when a child learns very early that certain truths create consequences and certain emotions and behaviors make other people feel uncomfortable. And then something strange happens. You spend years, even decades, mistaking the absence of those parts for your personality until life begins asking for them back. And for me, that happened through immigration, through separation from everything familiar and everyone I knew. Survival, learning how to stand on my own feet, building a career, learning how to earn money and manage money, how to speak up, set up boundaries, how to make very difficult decisions when there was no one else to rely on. And at that time, life just felt very heavy. But looking back now, I can see that this was some sort of a training ground. A long, uncomfortable, and painful process of rebuilding the parts of myself that I had to bury very early. And at that time, I didn't understand any of this. All I knew was that that work was very uncomfortable, lonely sometimes, and really terrifying. And the strange thing is that I never thought that I was the right person for that type of work. Like, I never thought of myself as strong in that way. And I could never imagine that life would ask me to develop that kind of spine, to lead, to confront things directly, to speak up in rooms where I felt small, and to fight for the ideas and systems that were far bigger than me. If anything, I wanted something much quieter, a simple life, something anonymous. I just wanted to be happy and live life without having to become that kind of person. But life kept placing me in situations where those parts were required, for the reasons I still don't fully understand yet. The kind of strength that I never felt qualified to carry. I started to realize that the strength that was being asked of me was the exact strength that I once learned to bury. Because breaking something is so much easier, while rebuilding something inside yourself, even though it's something that used to come naturally to you, is so much harder. And as I kept going, the picture began to change. Earlier in my life, I was often triggered by men who expressed their authority and decisiveness easily. I would see them as ego-driven, insensitive, selfish, arrogant, sometimes even almost too aggressive and too full of themselves. But then slowly I started to realize that what I was reacting to were actually the qualities I once learned to suppress, not these men. And as I began integrating my own clarity, authority, and ability to act decisively, those reactions started to fade. And around that time, instead of resisting those qualities in others, I actually started seeking mentorship. And what was interesting was that actually the majority of people who really shaped my growth, both professionally and personally, were actually men. I started to admire their composure, their discipline, their intellectual clarity and confidence. I still remember how uncomfortable I felt even discussing money early in my career. When I received my first serious job offer in tech, the numbers already felt unreal to me. It was more money than I have ever seen in my entire life. So I was just so happy and excited and really grateful, and I was ready to accept this offer immediately. But my mentor stopped me. And I will never forget what he told me, which completely caught me off guard at that time. He said, "Don't you dare accept that offer yet. If you don't ask, you're leaving money on the table. Know your worth. You deserve more than that. Go negotiate. I'll show you how." Every instinct in me wanted to avoid this conversation, but I tried. And the answer was yes. And then every offer that came later, I negotiated as well. And every single time I asked, the answer was, yes, we're going to give you that money. So he was right. If I hadn't asked, I would have left money on the table. I remain deeply grateful for all of those lessons. They have stayed with me ever since. So while I began respecting men who integrated their strengths, I started to feel something else very clearly. A profound sense of unease around men who suppressed their emotional depth, men who were emotionally cut off, unavailable, emotionally guarded against vulnerability, and unable to sit still with their own feelings. Because once you start integrating different parts of yourself, what used to feel familiar suddenly starts to feel deeply unsafe and unsettling. And that led me to a deeper question. Why are people so often drawn to the very dynamics that keeps them fragmented? That question is not new. Psychology has been wrestling with it for a really long time. And Carl Jung pointed to something very important here. He noticed that every person carries two complementary energies within themselves, the inner feminine and inner masculine. The feminine principle, or what Jung called the Anima, is often connected with perception, feeling, intuition, sensing meaning, relational depth. And the masculine principle, or the Animus, is often associated with expression, logic, structure, direction, authority, assertiveness, the ability to turn insight into action in the world. And psychological wholeness requires both, not one defeating the other. And Jung called that lifelong movement toward wholeness the individuation process, the gradual integration of these parts of ourselves that we have pushed into the unconscious. In real life, the balance is rarely intact because many men grow disconnected from their inner feminine aspect, the capacity for feeling, vulnerability, and emotional depth. And many women grow disconnected from their inner masculine aspect, their authority, clarity, decisiveness, and ability to stay firmly in her thinking and knowing. When a woman's animus is underdeveloped or pushed underground, she may sense meaning deeply and perceive truth intuitively, but struggle to bring those perceptions into form in the external world. What ends up happening is that when this woman encounters a man who carries and expresses those capacities freely, visibility, decisiveness, direction, she may feel strongly drawn to them. And that may appear as a strong attraction or irritation or a combination of both, causing a very complex internal conflict. Because what psyche is resisting or is drawn to is often the very thing that it's trying to integrate. And something similar happens in the opposite direction. When a man is disconnected from feeling, from empathy, intuition, emotional contact, and vulnerability, it usually appears as emotional avoidance, discomfort with vulnerability, difficulty processing his own feelings, and inability to truly meet another person emotionally. And usually these men find themselves attracted to or intimidated by, or both, women who carry those capacities naturally. And this attraction can feel overwhelming, magnetic, and extremely intense. But sometimes what looks like attraction might just be recognition, when the part of the self is encountering in another human being something that it had to push away or completely abandon in order to survive. And when that happens, we rarely recognize it for what it actually is. Psychology has a word for it: projection. This is what happens when we place what actually belongs to us onto another person. So you're no longer just seeing them, you're seeing them plus the missing fragment of yourself that this person appears to carry. That is why early attraction can sometimes feel mysterious, almost destined. But sometimes what feels like destiny is just reflection. You're not meeting another person, you're meeting a fragment of yourself. And this realization sometimes leads to a very uncomfortable truth that many of us do not really like hearing. Sometimes attraction is not a signal of destiny. Sometimes it is a signal of unfinished work. And whether that person is meant to stay in your life or not often becomes clear after that work is done. And once you see projection clearly, you may notice that people do not always choose partners who help them grow. Very often they choose partners who allow them to stay comfortable in that fragmentation. For example, a man who is emotionally cut off can feel deeply drawn to an empathic woman because she can feel what he refuses to feel. She can regulate the emotional world he avoids. And This way, he doesn't have to develop the capacity himself, which allows him to stay exactly as he is. And many women that are empathic, intuitive, very sensitive, spend years, even decades in those dynamics because they're mistaking emotional labor with love. Because experiencing and witnessing someone's pain can feel like intimacy, while it is not. And the same pattern works in the opposite direction. A woman who has not yet learned to embody her own authority, decisiveness, clarity, and visibility may feel deeply drawn to men who embody those qualities, because being around someone's power can feel easier than claiming your own. And being chosen by someone who is visible can feel safer than becoming visible yourself. Eventually, projection begins to fall, and you start to see reality for what it is. And this moment can feel brutal, because the very person who once seemed to be extraordinary all of a sudden appears to be just human. And that's when many people say things like, "You've changed, you're not who I thought you were." But usually it's not the person that changed, it's just the projection dissolved. And with it, dissolved something else, the version of you that only existed inside that story. And when that happens, usually two paths appear. Sometimes projection collapses entirely. You just realize that you were never seeing the person clearly. You were seeing the role that they were playing in your own psyche. But something else can happen as well. Sometimes the illusion falls, and for the first time, you can see the real person, not the fantasy, not the missing half, not the one who is here to save you, but just the human being standing in front of you, with their own inner world, with their own contradictions, inner conflicts, their own fears and limits, and things they're still learning how to face, just as you are. So sometimes the end of the projection can be the end of the connection, but sometimes it can be the beginning of something real, because real love starts where projection ends. When projection falls away, love starts to look very different from what many of us were taught to chase. Because mature love is no longer two wounded people trying to complete each other. And it's no longer a survival strategy built around fear, dependency, or hope that someone will just come and save us and finally make us feel whole. Mature love becomes possible when the parts we're searching for outside ourselves have finally begun to come home. When a woman begins to integrate her own inner authority, clarity, decisiveness, and ability to express herself and act in this world. When a man begins to reconnect with his depth, emotions, feelings, and emotional presence. When both people have done enough inner work that they no longer ask the other person to carry what they refuse to develop within themselves. A man who can carry strength without closing his heart. Steady enough to face the world directly and open enough to still feel it. And a woman who can move through this world with intuition and depth without abandoning her authority and without shrinking herself in order to be chosen. And when two people like that meet, relationship stops being a rescue mission, and it begins a meeting of two people who can see each other clearly and choose each other freely. And from that place, relationship becomes a space for shared creation, for building something meaningful together and contributing something in ways that neither person could create alone. This is why many people, when they become more integrated, start asking themselves this question: do I actually need a relationship at all? Because when love is no longer about validation, resources, emotional outsourcing, or fear of being alone, then the old motivations start to disappear. The urgency that used to drive that relationship starts to dissolve. And when that happens, you realize that relationship can no longer be built on need. It has to be built on something deeper and meaningful, such as shared vision, purpose, shared service, a desire to build something meaningful together, legacy that outlives both people. Otherwise, a relationship starts to feel unnecessary because the need that once drove it has changed. And there is something else that became clear to me. The way that we may feel tempted to place another human being in the space that actually belongs to the sacred, when we put them at the center of our lives, the person whose presence determines whether life is worth living. And this has far more weight than any human being was ever meant to carry. Because when someone becomes the meaning of your life, what naturally happens is that love becomes entangled with fear, because losing that person equals to losing the meaning of your life or life itself, not just a relationship. If something truly sacred exists in your life, it cannot be another human being, because humans are impermanent. They change, they may leave, they die. And when that order is restored, when the sacred remains the sacred, and the other person is no longer asked to occupy that place, something inside love changes. Yes, there is still risk and there is still vulnerability, and there is still grief if things don't work out. But there is no collapse and no idolatry. And this is exactly what makes real love possible without turning it into your prison, because the other person is no longer your God. The truth is, most people are not really searching for love. They're searching for the missing parts of themselves. And until those parts come back home, the relationships repeat the same patterns: intensity, projection, disillusionment, over and over again. But when a person starts reclaiming those fragments, integrating their inner masculine and feminine aspects, facing their shadow, and standing strong in their own center, love stops being an escape from yourself. And it becomes a meeting that is only possible when you truly know who you are and who you were created to be. Maybe that's why real partnership is rare. Not because love is rare, but because wholeness is.